Some news from the continent now, and Sudan's Prime Minister Abdalla Hamdok has resigned just 6 weeks after he was reinstated as part of a political agreement with the military. Sudan has been undergoing a journey towards civilian rule, according to officials. That's since the ousting of the longtime leader Omar al-Bashir in 2019. But the country has been plunged into further instability after the military seized control by force in October last year. In a televised address yesterday, Hamdoks said that Sudan was crossing a dangerous turning point that threatens its whole survival. He's called for fresh round-table discussions on the country's political transition to democracy. Well, let's talk more about the situation in Sudan now with the Africa analyst, Advocate Sipho Mandula. Advocate, a very good evening to you. Welcome to News at Prime. So, does the departure of Hamdok, the second departure by the Prime Minister, move Sudan any closer, I wonder, to the stability it so desperately needs?
Evening, Tembekile and Jumbo Africa to the viewers. Tembekile, this is a sad moment if one considered that on the 1st of January, on Saturday, it was their 66th anniversary of their independence from their former colonial masters, where they should have crafted their own roadmap since 2019. Remember, as you are punting this issue of resigning since he was back into power in last year, almost 6 weeks into power, but we should trace back his achievement from 2019 until October 2021, where there was a fraction, political tension, the army again. So what we are seeing now, we might be going back to what we call military rule, military dictatorship under General Burhan. And that is a challenge to the AU, that is a challenge to the regional body and to the Arab League. As you know, USA has already hinted that there is a need for a constructive dialogue on this matter. But Tembekile, it is said that Sudan, it is going down in many instances. It is having refugees coming from the Tigray region. It is having a conflict on the Nile River. It is having a crisis even on its foreign debt that Hamdok tried to deal with IMF.
But even at his return, after he was under house arrest by the military, people were critical of Hamdok and his return because people were saying he's coming back at a disadvantage where he would not be able to go against the military powers. And here we sit tonight, that prophecy has come into reality. So why did he return?
Correctly, but I think why he did return, remember he did explain that he was avoiding the bloodshed. And secondly, as you are saying, yes, I was looking or reading what was the citizen's voice of Sudan. Others were saying that he might have returned, but he should have explained. He should have indicated what were the roadblocks around the power table when he was engaging with the military. Others are saying his going will not make any change because Sudan, it is already going down in the sense that it has been removed from the AU. And again, it is having a crisis on dealing with the IMF sanctions and as well as the US sanctions. But like I will say to you, for him to can return, it was that roadmap he has started in 2019. He felt he was pushed out of office and he was able to release some of his comrades who were arrested with him. Remember that he was arrested under house arrest and he was not able to make change during that time. So one can look that it is indeed another drawback, but if one looks at his thinking now, it is the issue that he has raised that there is a need for a critical national dialogue and to go back to the roadmap.
How does the critical dialogue take place? Because currently the protests don't have a main public face or a main public leadership structure.
And you know why, Tembekile? It is because of the Sudanese intelligence architect. The Sudanese military and intelligence can master how to censor civilian leadership. And that has happened several times. But when I was raising the issue of critical dialogue, what was the agreement of 2019? The issue was transition to civilian rule. And I think that's where the military is stuck. And remember when Hamdok came into power back in last year, he was able to remove some of the senior positions of military veterans who were part of Bashir's era. And that might have been one of the contentions. And secondly, if one looks at the military power that has been used against civilians, The UN has already echoed its voice, but it is said that we don't hear the voice from Addis Ababa to say, what does the AU say about the current crisis in Khartoum, the protest that has been going on for almost 6 weeks. And I think we have lost account of how many people have died now, as we know that we have 57 people who have lost their lives, and there is constant blazing of fire in Khartoum.
It's also worth noting, Advocate Mantula, that the military itself is not without civilian support, and I wonder what that can be credited to.
You know, that is the challenge even during Bashir's era. The civilian and military relations in most of the Arab states, it is not existing. And secondly, when the 2019 roadmap came in, when the women of Sudan took initiative to liberate Sudan, and Hamdoks came as a compromise, there was that issue of how do you manage the military to remain in the barracks and not remain in the parliament as well as the executive authority. And that's why we have a crisis of how do we navigate to deal with this military appetite of power, to deal with this military or autocratic rule that is even suppressing the voice of the civilians. And hence you can see that protesters have urged and reneged to say 2022 will be the year of protest, as they are urging that they don't want military rule, but they want a transition. They've missed actually the electoral calendar because they must prepare now for 2023 if they are planning for their electoral transition, because the only way to garner power in Sudan post-Bashir, it is through the ballot and not through the bullet.
But when you look at the level of instability, you've got protests in Sudan very frequently, more protesters being shot. Even this weekend, we saw another scenario. I think about 3 protesters were killed in a single day at the hands of the military, according to reports from Khartoum. You've also got a military that is clearly not going to wake up tomorrow and hand over power. So what then are the chances that come 2023, in a year from now, there will be an agreement from both sides to go to an election?
You know, Tembegile, I think they are on a political stalemate. There are political indifferences. They are not balancing what then is a national priority or national interest. We are talking of 46 million Sudanese who are on the brink of poverty, who are on the brink of an internal conflict that has been going on post-General Bashir's removal in 2019. Now, as you are raising this issue, it is going back to the AU Peace and Security Council. What then is the effectiveness and the power of the African Union Peace and Security Council when the UN and the US have already put their voices on how do we address this crisis of Sudan when you have a military that has got appetite for power, but they don't know the hour, that the hour represents the civilian authority that must lead. And that's why we are in this quagmire, we are in this debacle, because the crisis of Sudan again goes to the military power that they've been having during the Bashir's era. And this is the crisis of the Arab states. And that's why I think the AU is stuck. Felix Tshisekedi is not certain. The AU Peace and Security Council is silent. And that's why I was saying earlier, we find that the international community under the US Bureau of African Affairs, they're the ones who are making a loud noise more than our own African countries, including the neighboring countries. Because one would have assumed Egypt would have been concerned, Ethiopia would have been concerned, the South Sudan, Salva Kiir would have been concerned about this crisis of Hamdok resigning on the eve, like I was saying, post their Independence Day. And it means the words of Fanon remains. Independence in most of the African countries are a sham. They are not bringing development.
Advocate Sipho Mantula, I'd love to get into the priorities of those other countries which you've just named, but we're sadly out of time, because when you look at the situation domestically in many of those nations, they too are preoccupied with their own strife. But for tonight, thank you very much for being on News at Prime. That's Advocate Sipho Mantula's reflections on the situation in Sudan, where the Prime Minister Abdalla Hamdok has resigned after a short return to government, shall we say, not entirely power, because the military is in essence calling the shots in Sudan. And speaking